the antiseptic scent was a ghost, a pale imitation of the real thing. Here, at St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital, it was a clean, sterile thing, layered with the smell of floor polish and stale coffee from the break room. It was a scent designed to reassure, to imply order. Alara Vance knew the other version of that scent, the one that clung to Candace tents in the desert, desperately trying to mask the coppery tang of blood and the scorched earth smell of cordite. That scent was not about reassurance. It was a desperate prayer against infection, a chemical line drawn in the sand against the encroaching chaos of mortality. Her hands, which had once packed gaping wounds under the deafening thud of rotor wash, now fumbled with the delicate plastic of an IV catheter. The skin of the elderly patient was like parchment, the vein a shy blue river threatening to retreat from the needle's touch. Alara's movements were deliberately slow, almost painfully so. Anyone watching would have seen hesitation, a lack of confidence, bordering on incompetence. It was a carefully constructed fiction, a mask of meekness. She wore like a lead apron. "Come on, Vance," she heard a junior nurse mutter under her breath from across the bay. "It's a simple stick." Alara didn't react. Her focus was not truly on the needle. Her mind, a tactical computer, honed by years in environments where a moment's inattention was fatal, was processing everything else. The rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor in Bay 2 was slightly off, a subtle arrhythmia the machine hadn't flagged yet. The new security guard at the ambulance entrance shifted his weight from foot to foot, a sign of inexperience and nervousness. He held his hand too close to his sidearm. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed at a frequency that vibrated just behind her teeth, a constant low-grade irritant. Her internal monologue was a stream of data, a quiet assessment of a battlefield disguised as a workplace. Exit points, cover, potential threats, old habits, she knew, were the ghosts that never left. She finally slid the needle in. Her touch so gentle, the patient barely flinched. The flash of red in the chamber was a small victory. She secured the line with tape, her movements methodical. Outwardly, she looked relieved to have completed such a simple task. Inwardly, she was already running diagnostics on the man in Bay 2, cross-referencing his chart in her memory with the sound of his faltering heart. "Are we planning on admiring our handiwork all day, Nurse Vance?" The voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of the emergency room like a whip crack. It belonged to Dr. Marcus Evans, the attending physician, and the petty king of this small, chaotic kingdom. He strode towards her, his expensive Italian loafers squeaking with self-importance on the polished linoleum. He trailed a cloud of cologne that smelled of money and arrogance, a scent that always seemed to be fighting a losing battle against the hospital's inherent odors of sickness and disinfectant. "The line is in, doctor," Alara said, her voice quiet and flat. She kept her eyes downcast, a posture of deference she had perfected. "Took you long enough," Evans sneered, picking up the chart. He made a show of scanning it, his lips curled in a permanent state of disapproval. "Did you even check for contraindications with his beta blockers? Or is that beyond the scope of your current capabilities?" "I checked, doctor." "Marvelous." The sarcasm was thick enough to be a physical force. He tossed the chart back onto the patient's bed. "This is an ER, not a retirement home. Some of us are trying to save lives here." He turned and walked away, leaving a wake of silence. The other nurses and techs studiously avoided Alara's gaze, some with pity, others with a hint of scorn. Humiliating Nurse Vance was one of Dr. Evans's favorite pastimes, a way to assert his dominance. Alara simply stood there for a moment, her face a placid mask. Inside, she performed a familiar ritual. She cataloged the insult, filed it away, and then let it go. It was just noise. Static. In the Coringal Valley, insults had been screamed in her face by men whose intestines she was trying to stuff back into their bodies. Dr. Evans's condescension was a gentle rain compared to that hurricane. She exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that settled the tremor of adrenaline that wanted to rise. The wall inside her, the one that kept the past sealed away, held firm. She turned her attention back to her patient, her movements, once again slow, unassuming, and utterly invisible. Later that afternoon, the automatic doors hissed open to admit a trio of young men in military fatigues, their laughter echoing in the sterile space. They were from the nearby Fort Braddock, likely with minor injuries from a training exercise. One had his arm in a makeshift sling, another was limping, and the third was dabbing a cut on his forehead. They were loud, alive, and filled the ER with an energy that was both jarring and familiar. "Look at this place," the limping one said, a corporal by his insignia. "Cleaner than the barracks, that's for sure." A triage nurse assigned them to Alara's section. As she approached with a blood pressure cuff, the corporal grinned at her. "Easy there, ma'am. Just a sprain. No need to handle me like I'm a live IED." The words hit her like a physical blow, a ghost of pressure in her chest. For a split second, the fluorescent lights of the ER were replaced by the blinding white sun of Afghanistan. The smell of antiseptic vanished, replaced by the scent of hot dust, ozone, and the unforgettable, sickeningly sweet smell of burnt hair and flesh. She saw a young private, no older than this corporal, his face a mask of confusion, as he looked down at where his legs used to be. The memory was a flashbang in her mind, brilliant and deafening. She blinked. The ER snapped back into focus. The corporal was still grinning, oblivious. "Understood, Corporal," she said, her voice betraying nothing. She wrapped the cuff around his arm, her movements careful, almost reverent. The soldiers exchanged amused glances at her deliberate pace. They saw a timid civilian nurse, easily flustered by their military bravado. They couldn't see the woman who had held the rank of Command Sergeant Major, who had directed mass casualty scenarios in places that made Fort Braddock look like a country club. They couldn't know that she was treating his minor injury with the same focused gravity she had once given to a sucking chest wound because, to her, every patient was a soldier who deserved to go home. The mask stayed in place. It had to. It was the foundation of this quiet, fragile piece she was trying to build. Maya, a nurse barely a year out of school, watched the exchange from the nurses' station. She found Nurse Vance to be an enigma. She was, by all outward appearances, the least competent nurse on the floor. Her charting was slow, her practical skills seemed hesitant, and she never spoke unless spoken to. Dr. Evans treated her like a piece of furniture, and the other staff had followed his lead, isolating her through a combination of pity and professional Darwinism. Yet, Maya had noticed things. She had seen Alara subtly reposition a patient's airway with a folded towel, a small adjustment that silenced a stridor no one else had seemed concerned about. She had heard Alara quietly suggest to a resident that a patient's abdominal pain might be a referred symptom from a cardiac issue. A suggestion the resident initially dismissed, but which later proved to be a life-saving diagnosis. There were flashes of a brilliant clinical mind hidden beneath the clumsy exterior, like glints of steel beneath a shroud of burlap. Maya tried to bridge the gap. "Don't let Dr. Evans get to you," she offered one day in the break room, where Alara was methodically wiping down the counter. "He's like that with everyone." Alara didn't look up from her task. "Understood," she said, her voice giving nothing away. "It's just, you're a good nurse," Maya pressed. Though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. "You just need more confidence." Alara paused her wiping. She looked at Maya, and for a second the meekness in her eyes receded, replaced by something ancient and weary. It was a look that made Maya feel impossibly young. "Confidence is a luxury," Alara said, her voice so low it was almost a whisper. "Competence is a necessity." She then resumed wiping the counter. Maya was left with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that Alara Vance was not who she appeared to be. The petty tyranny of Dr. Evans continued to escalate. He seemed to have made it his personal mission to drive Alara out of his ER. He began assigning her the most thankless tasks, far below her station as a registered nurse. One day, it was cleaning and restocking all the supply closets. "Vance," he announced loudly at the central station, ensuring a wide audience. "The supply closets are a disaster. We need someone with a meticulous attention to detail and plenty of time on their hands. It seems like work perfectly suited to your pace." A few of the staff snickered. Alara simply nodded. "Yes, doctor." She spent the next 4 hours in the cramped, windowless closets, counting gauze pads and organizing suture kits. The enclosed space should have been claustrophobic, but for her, it was a sanctuary. The rhythmic, mindless work allowed a part of her brain to rest while another part stood sentinel. Leaning against a cool metal shelf, surrounded by the clean smell of packaged sterile supplies, she closed her eyes and practiced the breathing exercises she had learned to control her heart rate during sniper engagements. In, hold out. Control the body. Control the mind. A memory surfaced. Unbidden, a different cramped space. The belly of a C-130, flying blacked out over hostile territory. The only light was the red glow from the overhead lamps, casting demonic shadows on the faces of the operators around her. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, jet fuel, and the metallic tang of fear. She wasn't a nurse then. She was the senior medic, the one they called Ghost because she moved so quietly, and because she was the one you saw right before you either died or were miraculously saved. The pressure in the cabin was immense, a physical weight that matched the crushing burden of responsibility. She pushed the memory down. That life was over. She was Nurse Vance now. Slow, quiet, incompetent Nurse Vance. That was the price of peace. The breaking point, when it began to approach, was silent and internal. Evans, not content with simple humiliation, moved to active sabotage. A patient with a complex history was admitted, suffering from what looked like a severe allergic reaction. Alara took the man's history, meticulously documenting every medication, every allergy, every recent change in his life. She suspected anaphylaxis, but noted a key inconsistency in his symptoms that pointed towards a rare but serious cardiac complication. She completed the chart and handed it off for Evans to review before beginning treatment. An hour later, Evans stormed up to her, his face a mask of theatrical fury. "Vance, where is Mr. Henderson's chart? We're flying blind here." "Are you trying to kill my patient?" "I charted it and placed it in the rack an hour ago, doctor," she said calmly. "Well, it's not there," he roared. "You are a liability." "Do it again. Now." Alara found a new chart and began the process again from memory, her handwriting calm and steady. She knew what had happened. She had seen the way Evans had palmed the chart when he thought no one was looking. He was building a case against her, documenting a pattern of incompetence that existed only in his machinations. For the first time, a flicker of true anger, hot and sharp, pierced through her disciplined control. Her jaw clenched, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of the muscle. She remembered a promise made to a dying friend, a brother in arms, on a blood-soaked rooftop in Fallujah. "Live for us, Alara. Live a quiet life. Find some peace." This daily degradation, this assault on her professionalism, was the price of that promise. But the weight of it was becoming unbearable. The alarm was a violent blaring shriek that shattered the relative calm of the evening shift. It was a sound that bypassed thought and went straight to the adrenal glands. Over the intercom, a woman's voice, stripped of all emotion, delivered the news. Code Black. Mass casualty incident. Support structure collapse. Downtown overpass. Multiple vehicles involved. ETA on first wave, 5 minutes. Code black. The words sucked the air out of the room. The kingdom of controlled chaos instantly devolved into the genuine article. Nurses and doctors began running, their voices rising in pitch. The symphony of the ER became a cacophony of panic shouts and clattering equipment. At the center of the storm was Dr. Evans. His face, usually flushed with arrogance, was now chalk-white with fear. He stood near the main desk, waving his hands, issuing a stream of frantic contradictory orders. Get me trauma packs, all of them. Clear bays 1 through 5, no, 1 through 7. Someone call the on-call surgeons. Where are the portable X-ray machines? We need more O-negative blood. Why is no one moving? His commands were superficial, a panicked recitation of a textbook disaster protocol without any real-time strategic thought. His hands trembled so violently he couldn't hold the pen steady. He was a general, with a perfect parade uniform, but no concept of how to fight a war. The staff, looking to their leader for direction, found only panic, and that panic became contagious. The system was breaking down before the first victim had even arrived. But for Alara Vance, something else was happening. As the external chaos escalated, her internal world became preternaturally calm. The noise of the alarms and the shouting voices faded into a manageable, distant static. The constant, grinding pressure of maintaining her meek persona, a weight she carried every second of every day, simply vanished. It was replaced by a crystalline, diamond-hard clarity. Her heart rate, which had been unpleasantly elevated by Evans's earlier confrontation, slowed to a steady, powerful 60 beats per minute, ENUT. Her senses sharpened. She could smell the fierce sweat of a young resident, hear the subtle crackle in the intercom that indicated a power fluctuation, see the entire layout of the ER, not as a room, but as a tactical space. It was a mass casualty collection point. This was not a civilian crisis. It was a battlefield, and on the battlefield, she was not Nurse Vance. She was home. First wave of ambulances arrived, their sirens dying with a final, mournful wail. The doors of the ER burst open, and the horror began to spill in. Paramedics rushed past, their faces grim, shouting out injuries, multiple fractures and internal bleeding. Head trauma, unresponsive, crush injury, GCS of 5. A young soldier, a corporal, was wheeled in on a gurney. It was the same one from earlier, the one who had joked about the IED. His bravado was gone, replaced by a gray, waxy pallor. A jagged piece of rebar was protruding from the right side of his chest. His breathing was rapid and shallow, and the veins in his neck were distended, classic signs of a tension pneumothorax. A fatal pressure cooker was building in his chest, crushing his heart and lungs. He was crashing, and he was crashing fast. Dr. Evans, seeing the uniform, rushed over, eager to appear heroic. Get him to Bay 1. I need a 14-gauge needle and a large-bore IV setup. Stat. He grabbed the needle from a terrified-looking Maya. His hands were still shaking, the adrenaline of panic making his movements jerky and uncertain. He ripped open the corporal's torn fatigue shirt, exposing the wound. He swabbed the area with betadine, his motions sloppy. He positioned the needle, aiming for the space between the 4th and 5th ribs. Cardiac box. It was a fatal mistake. A needle inserted there would puncture the pericardium and hit the heart, or a major vessel, turning a survivable injury into a death sentence. Alara saw it happen as if in slow motion. The trembling needle, the wrong landmark. The terrified eyes of the young soldier, who was still conscious enough to know that something was terribly wrong. In that frozen moment, 2 oaths, 2 lives collided within her. The promise to her fallen friend to live a quiet life, and the oath she had taken as both a medic and a nurse to first do no harm. The quiet life was a lie if it was bought with the blood of another soldier. The oath won. Stop. The word was quiet, spoken in a low, calm tone, but it sliced through the surrounding din like a scalpel. Evans, his focus absolute on his impending mistake, didn't hear her. Or if he did, he ignored it. Alara moved. The slow, hesitant shuffle was gone. Erased, she flowed through the chaos with a liquid grace, an economy of motion that was breathtaking in its efficiency. She covered the 10 feet between them in 2 silent steps. She placed her hand on his wrist, just above the hand that held the needle. I said stop. Her grip was not violent, but it was absolute. It was the grip of someone who knew leverage, who understood anatomy not just for healing, but for breaking. It was a grip of immovable iron. Evans finally looked at her, his eyes wide with shock and fury. "Get your hands off me, Vance," he hissed, trying to wrench his arm away. "This is gross insubordination. You're fired." Alara didn't even blink. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the vital signs monitor, watching the corporal's blood pressure plummet. The time for quietness was over. The time for hiding was over. The mask didn't just crack. It disintegrated into dust. Her posture, normally a study in meekness, snapped ramrod straight, her shoulders squared, her chin came up. Her eyes, once perpetually downcast, were now locked onto the situation, cold, analytical, and radiating an authority that was terrifying in its intensity. Her voice, when she spoke again, had dropped an octave into a tone of pure, undisputed command. It was the voice of the ghost of Kandahar, a voice that had commanded men in the face of death. "You are relieved, doctor." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. With a smooth, irresistible pressure, she took the needle from his limp, unresisting fingers. Dr. Evans stumbled back, his mouth agape, utterly stripped of his power by a presence he could not comprehend. Alara turned her full attention to the corporal. The chaos of the ER, the sputtering form of Dr. Evans, the shocked faces of her colleagues, it all faded away. There was only the mission. Her hands moved with a blur of practiced, flawless precision. She tilted the corporal's head back, checking his airway with a single, fluid motion. Her fingers found the correct landmark on his chest, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, well above the heart. It was a place she could have found blindfolded in the dark. She drove the needle in with a firm, controlled push. There was a soft pop as it punctured the pleural cavity, followed by a distinct hiss of escaping air. On the monitor, the corporal's blood pressure, which had been in a free fall, immediately began to climb. His oxygen saturation ticked upward. The frantic beeping slowed to a more stable rhythm. She had saved his life in less than 3 seconds. The corporal, who had been gasping for air, took a deeper, shuddering breath. He looked up at Alara, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain, confusion, and a dawning, impossible recognition. He'd seen that look of cold, lethal competence before. He'd seen it in the eyes of the Tier 1 operators, who had fast-roped onto a rooftop to pull his fire team out of a hopeless ambush in the Korangal Valley. It was the look of a guardian angel who had walked through hell. Alara didn't pause to acknowledge the miracle she had just performed. She was already scanning the rest of the battlefield. The ER was still a swirling mess of disorganized effort. She became the command and control node. "Maya!" Her voice was a whip crack, devoid of any of the hesitation Maya had ever heard from her. "Get me a trauma pack and 2 units of O-negative blood for Bay 1. Now." Maya, who had been frozen in shock, was galvanized by the sheer force of Alara's command. She saw the absolute certainty in her eyes, the undeniable authority that had replaced the timid nurse. She didn't look to Dr. Evans. She simply said, "Yes, ma'am," and ran. Alara's head swiveled, her eyes taking in the entire scene, triaging patients with a glance. "Harris," she barked at a senior nurse. "Bay 3, that man has a compromised femoral artery. I need a tourniquet on him, high and tight, and I want you to time it. Go." He nodded, his face grim with understanding, and moved. "Chen," she called to a young resident who was floundering with a difficult IV line. "He needs a central line. You're wasting time. Get the kit." The resident, who technically outranked her, stared for a second, before the authority in her voice registered. He scrambled to obey. Within 90 seconds, Alara Vance had taken a room full of panicked, directionless individuals and forged them into a ruthlessly efficient trauma unit. She moved from patient to patient, a whirlwind of competence. Her hands a blur as she intubated one patient, manually clamped a bleeder on another, and directed the placement of a chest tube on a third. Her orders were short, precise, and immediately understood. She didn't shout. She projected a calm, absolute control that cut through the fear and restored order. The staff, from the most junior tech to the most senior nurse, responded instinctively. They bypassed the established chain of command without a second thought, their allegiance shifting from the man with the title to the woman with the skill. And through it all, Dr. Marcus Evans stood on the periphery, a ghost in his own kingdom. The ER he had ruled through fear and condescension was now operating with a level of efficiency he had only ever read about. He tried to reassert himself, to shout, to give an order. "Security," he croaked, his voice thin and reedy. "Security, get her out of my ER." No one even looked at him. No one heard him. His authority, built on nothing more than a title and an ego, had evaporated in the face of a true crisis. He was irrelevant, a sputtering, impotent monument to his own failure, forced to watch as the quiet, clumsy nurse he had tormented saved lives he was utterly incompetent to protect. Hours bled into one another. The frantic, explosive energy of the initial rush gave way to the long, grinding work of stabilization. The ER was a landscape of controlled devastation. Floors were slick with fluids, and bins overflowed with blood-soaked gauze and discarded packaging. But the chaos was gone. The patients were treated, stabilized, and moved to surgery or the ICU. A weary, almost reverent quiet had settled over the staff. They moved with a new purpose, a new respect for the quiet woman who was now meticulously cleaning a wound on a patient's arm. Her movements were slow again, but no one mistook it for hesitation anymore. They saw the deep, ingrained economy in every action, the focus of a master craftsman at her work. The automatic doors hissed open again, but this time it wasn't an ambulance. A group of men in immaculate army dress uniforms entered, moving with a quiet, disciplined confidence that immediately commanded the room's attention. They parted to allow their leader to step forward. He was a tall man with silver hair and a face carved from granite. 4 silver stars gleamed on each of his collar points. He was a full general, and he radiated an aura of command that made Dr. Evans's previous bluster seem like a child's tantrum. Dr. Evans saw his chance. This was it. A 4-star general. A chance to salvage his reputation, to reassert his authority in front of a powerful witness. He smoothed his stained lab coat, puffed out his chest, and strode forward, extending a hand. "General, an honor. I am Dr. Evans, Chief of Emergency Medicine. It has been a trying night, but I have the situation well in hand. How can I assist you?" General Marcus Thorne didn't even glance at the outstretched hand. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept the room, assessing the damage, the staff, the patients. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the aftermath of real battles. His gaze passed over Evans as if he were a piece of furniture and continued its sweep. until it landed on the woman in the corner, calmly applying a dressing. The general stopped. The hard lines of his face softened, replaced by an expression of profound, utter disbelief. He took a step forward, then another, his eyes locked on Alara. "Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble of astonishment that nonetheless carried across the silent room. "Sergeant Major Vance? What in God's name are you doing here?" Alara looked up from her work. Her face was smudged with dirt and blood, her eyes shadowed with a bone-deep weariness. She offered the general a small, tired nod of acknowledgement. "Just trying to live a quiet life, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Evans, seeing his moment of glory stolen, erupted. "Sergeant Major, sir, you must be mistaken. This is Nurse Vance, and I can assure you she is a liability. A loose cannon, her actions tonight were reckless and insubordinate. I am in the process of having her license permanently revoked." General Thorne turned his head slowly, fixing Dr. Evans with a glacial stare so cold it seemed to drop the temperature in the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Doctor," he began, his tone dangerously soft, "the woman you call a liability is Command Sergeant Major Alara Vance, United States Army, retired. She was the senior enlisted advisor and chief medic for a Joint Special Operations Command task force that you are not cleared to know exists. The reason you have never heard of her is because her entire career is classified." He took a step closer to the now trembling doctor. "You talk about her being reckless. I once watched her perform a field thoracotomy with a Leatherman tool during a sandstorm while taking direct enemy fire. She held a young ranger's heart in her hand to manually keep it beating until the medevac arrived. That ranger is alive today and has 3 children. You accuse her of insubordination? This woman has forgotten more about advanced trauma medicine than you will ever learn. She didn't just write the manual on prolonged field care for special operations. She is the manual. The life-saving needle decompression she performed on my corporal over there, the one you were about to fatally botch? She perfected that technique on a dirt floor in Afghanistan, with nothing but a pocket knife and a force of will that could bend steel." The general's aide stepped forward, holding up a tablet. On the screen was crystal-clear security footage from the ER. It showed Dr. Evans, pale and shaking, aiming the needle for the corporal's heart. Then it showed Alara's calm, swift intervention, her flawless procedure, and her subsequent command of the entire department. "Your incompetence and your arrogance nearly cost that soldier his life," Thorne said, his voice now like grinding stone. "You are not a doctor. You are a coward with a medical degree. You are a disgrace to your profession and to every competent man and woman working in this hospital." The general nodded to the hospital administrator, who had arrived with his entourage and had been watching the entire exchange, his face growing paler by the second. "He's all yours." The administrator stepped forward, his expression grim. "Dr. Evans, your employment at St. Jude's is terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Your actions tonight will be subject to a full review by the medical board." 2 burly security guards, including the nervous one Alara had noted earlier, stepped up on either side of Evans. The doctor stood frozen, his face a mottled canvas of disbelief and humiliation. He was escorted out of the ER he had once ruled, his squeaking loafers a pathetic, retreating sound. Justice had not been loud or explosive, but quiet, absolute, and utterly devastating. In the profound silence that followed, General Thorne turned back to Alara. The hardness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary respect. "Vance." "Alara, we need you," he said, his voice softer now. "I didn't come here tonight looking for you. I came because my corporal needed the best surgeon in the state, and I was going to demand him. Turns out, the best wasn't a surgeon at all, he sighed. The quiet life, I can see why you wanted it, but your skills, they're a gift, Alara. A heavy one, but a gift nonetheless. The Army is opening a new National Intrepid Center of Excellence, a state-of-the-art trauma research and training facility. We need someone to run the training division, not a doctor, not an administrator, a warrior. Someone who knows the real cost, someone who can teach these new medics how to bring our soldiers home. Alara looked from the general's earnest face to the young corporal she had saved. He was watching her, his eyes filled with an awe that bordered on worship. She looked at Maya, who was staring at her as if seeing a legend come to life. The quiet life had been a penance, an attempt to outrun the ghosts of her past. But perhaps she had it wrong. Perhaps true peace wasn't found in hiding from the world, but in serving it. Perhaps the best way to honor the dead was to train the living. She gave a single, slow nod. The decision was made. The ghost would walk in the light again. She turned back to the corporal, her focus narrowing once more to the patient in front of her. Her voice, when she spoke, was back to its quiet professional cadence. But now it was imbued with an unshakable authority that no one in that room would ever question again. Pain level, Corporal? The young soldier managed a weak, lopsided grin. 0, Sergeant Major, he rasped. Just 0. General Thorne allowed a rare, genuine smile to touch his lips. He walked over to the corporal's bedside. Thorne said, a glint of dry humor in his eyes as he looked at Alara. He said to tell you that your bedside manner is still terrible. For the first time that night, maybe for the first time in years, the faintest hint of a smile touched Alara Vance's lip. It was a small thing, a flicker of light in the long, deep shadows of her past. But it was a start. It was a new beginning.